Hi everyone, and welcome back to Inside Tech, where in this video we'll be looking at the latest generation of iPhones, the XS, XS Max and XR. I'll be covering every single new feature to this year's lineup, including the improved displays, the cameras, and of course the new A12 Bionic chip, supposedly the smartest and most powerful chip in any smartphone. I'll also be explaining the differences between each model, which one I think offers the best value for money, and of course whether or not you should upgrade to one of these new phones. Let's take a look. So starting off with the unboxings, everything here will be familiar. I'll be unboxing both the XS Max and a XR at the same time, since we do have exactly the same accessories inside. We have our envelope with all of the usual paperwork, the SIM ejector tool, and a set of Apple stickers. Of course, then we have the phone itself, the 5-watt wall adapter, some earpods with the lightning connector, and finally a USB-A to lightning charging cable. So despite charging £1,000, Apple still isn't including a fast charger in the box, so you'll need to get this separately if you want to fast charge your new iPhone. In a further push towards Bluetooth earphones, we no longer have the Lightning to 3.5mm headphone adapter included in the box. Taking a look first at the iPhone XS, I actually have the Max model here to look at, since this is essentially the same phone but in a larger form factor with only a couple of small differences. So during the video, all of the tech specs and features do apply to both the XS and XS Max unless specifically stated otherwise. And yes, since I am in the UK, you will be seeing the FCC logos on the back of the phones throughout the video, since they're required to still be there by law. An obvious change from last year is that we now have the new gold colour option, but we also have a larger and extortionately priced 512GB capacity model. A maxed out XS Max will cost you more than a 13-inch MacBook Pro. Externally, what we have is exactly the same design as last year's iPhone X, just with a few small changes. The XS with identical dimensions and just 3 grams heavier. This could be explained by the new and improved glass used for the front and rear panels, which Apple claims to be the strongest and most durable glass ever used in a smartphone. Returning are the stainless steel bands surrounding the phone, and in an unusual move from Apple, these no longer house symmetrical speaker grills, making way for a couple of additional antenna bands. This change was more than likely necessary in order to accommodate the new gigabit class LTE that the XS model supports, which will allow for faster download speeds. A more subtle change from the iPhone X is that the camera module is now ever so slightly larger, so those hoping to bring their old phone cases to the XS are out of luck. As could be expected for the latest S iteration of the iPhone, most of the upgrades are internal, and this year they're led by the introduction of the A12 Bionic chip. The 6-core CPU and quad-core GPU combine to deliver up to 15% faster performance and 50% faster graphics, but with much greater efficiency. They demand far less power and drain less battery life, exploiting the benefits of the processor's new 7nm architecture. The XS offers an extra 30 minutes of battery life from last year's model, whilst the XS Max gives an extra 1 hour 30 minutes. Opening apps, scrolling and multitasking are noticeably faster, although a lot of this apparent speed boost can be attributed to the faster iOS 12 software. Face ID now has an advanced secure enclave and new algorithms to give faster unlock speeds, and during testing there was a noticeable speed increase, but nothing substantial. One of the iPhone X's biggest criticisms was the laggy multitasking and poor memory management, and the XS rectifies this issue by bumping the RAM up to 4GB. The phone does a much better job of handling multiple background apps, they load more quickly from standby, and the overall user experience is much smoother. With the processor and RAM improvements, the XS and XS Max are the fastest and most responsive iPhones ever made. In a first for iPhone, this year's lineup will offer dual SIM support. This will take the form of the existing Nano SIM plus a configurable eSIM that will become available for activation later next year. In China, however, there will be an additional physical SIM instead of the eSIM. Moving on to the displays, the XS is equipped with a slightly improved iteration of last year's 5.8-inch Super Retina HD OLED display, with the XS Max getting a 6.5-inch version. The majority of the specifications remain unchanged, but Apple claim you'll see improved colour on the new screens thanks to a 60% increase in dynamic range. The HDR displays support HDR10 and Dolby Vision, so picture and video content, particularly on the XS Max, look absolutely stunning, and these screens are easily two of the best on the market. The phone's speakers have also been improved with a wider stereo sound, so watching movies and mobile gaming has never been better. The displays are not only more durable and colour-rich, but there's also been a slight boost to water resistance, with the XS models rated to IP68, allowing for submersion at 2 meters for up to 30 minutes. A number of changes have been made to the phone's cameras, the most significant of which is the introduction of Smart HDR, utilising new algorithms and faster sensors to enrich your images with greater highlights and shadows. Essentially, this is achieved by blending multiple exposures of your image into a single photo to provide greater detail. Low light images have also been improved thanks to slightly larger sensors, one of the more noticeable improvements in real-world usage, although the iPhone still can't compete with the likes of the Google Pixel 3. Portrait mode has also been revamped with advanced bokeh and depth control, even after you shoot. Extended dynamic range is now available for video up to 30 frames per second in both cameras, and for the first time, stereo recording is possible with the iPhone's 4-mic setup. The FaceTime camera now supports 1080p 60 recording versus 1080p 30 in the iPhone X. But the most significant improvement here is the cinematic stabilization, drastically improving on last year's model, with the two features working together to produce much smoother video. The only other small change is that the XS Max brings back limited landscape mode support for some apps, and an emphasis should be placed on the word limited there. This doesn't apply to the home screen, and in general the phone really doesn't take advantage of that huge screen real estate and utilize landscape features, like for example the iPad does. So aside from this, the better battery life and obviously the screen size, the XS and XS Max are otherwise identical. Moving on to the iPhone XR, the most obvious visual difference here is that we have a range of vibrant colour options to choose from, 6 to be exact, and it's worth noting that the max storage size here is capped at 256GB. In terms of size and weight, the XR sits right in the middle of the XS and XS Max, but it does have a slightly thicker body. We still have an all-screen notch design with glass front and rear panels, so that means we still get wireless charging, but we do have the iPhone 8's anodized aluminium borders rather than steel. Fortunately, these borders do still house symmetrical speaker grills thanks to not having as many antenna bands. The drawback here though is that the iPhone XR doesn't support gigabit LTE, but it will still support dual SIM. What's important to note about the front panel is that the bezels are significantly thicker than in the XS models. This was actually surprisingly noticeable when using the phone, and is something that online photos do a good job of disguising. Of course, if you're coming from a pre-iPhone X phone, then the all-screen design is still going to be a huge step up, but it's still important to note here the difference from the XS and XS Max. Equally important are the differences in water resistance. The XR doesn't receive the IP68 upgrade, and instead retains the iPhone X's IP67 rating, allowing for submersion up to only 1 meter for 30 minutes. Looking at the rear, you can see we have just a single camera lens, which, just like the XS models, does annoyingly protrude from the glass, so the phones don't lay flat on a surface. I personally would definitely take a sacrifice to the camera quality to bring back that flush camera lens. This is actually the exact same camera as the XS minus the telephoto lens, but I'll talk more about what this means later on. The XR is packing the latest A12 Bionic chip used in the XS, so we won't need to take a performance hit when opting for the less expensive iPhone. The XR does however keep just the 3GB of RAM rather than 4, but this is perfectly sufficient for the LCD display, and the XR's handling of memory tasks is far superior to the iPhone X. Of course, the fundamental difference between the XR and XS, and the main reason for that reduced price point, is the different display type. Whilst the XS models use OLED technology, the XR has a cheaper LCD display, which Apple have affectionately named the Liquid Retina display. Of course, in moving from OLED to LCD, you do lose the high dynamic range display, which means the contrast ratio is much lower and there are no deep blacks. It also means you can't technically view the HDR photos you take with the XR on the device itself, an issue we've seen before in older iPhones. But this display type is by no means bad. In fact, the XR has the most colour accurate LCD in the industry. Content still looks incredibly sharp and crisp, and this is easily the best looking display on any non-OLED iPhone. The XR still has the same brightness, wide colour display and true tonability of the XS, but crucially doesn't have 3D touch. This is largely replaced with a long press instead, but it is slightly less convenient and there are no peek to view control options, links or images. Now going back to that single lens camera, since this is the same faster lens used in the XS, the XR still has smart HDR for photos. Of course, without the secondary telescopic lens, the XR is missing the 2x optical zoom, but surprisingly, still retains both portrait mode plus the new advanced depth control features brought to the XS. Instead of using two lenses to create a sense of depth, the XR utilizes software to mimic the same effect. The limitations of this mean that in real-world usage, portrait mode isn't quite as accurate as the XS in terms of detection, and the lighting modes are slightly more restricted when using the rear camera. However, taking photos and video recording is otherwise completely unchanged. Also unchanged is the front-facing FaceTime camera, so all of the dynamic range and stabilization improvements are still present. The battery life upgrades with the XS models are welcome, but the improvements made here with the XR afford the phone one of its most significant selling points. Not only do we still have wireless charging and fast charging, but we also get an additional 1.5 hours against the previous best battery life iPhone, the 8 Plus, giving the XR the best battery life of any iPhone to date. Practically speaking, this is one of the most useful and important features altogether, certainly the aspect that's likely to affect you the most on a day-to-day basis, and it's definitely a great reason to choose the XR over a XS. Overall, I'd definitely say that the iPhone XR is the easiest phone to recommend upgrading to for anyone using a pre-iPhone X phone. With the XS's performance, the same Face ID and camera improvements, plus the better battery life, the XR is certainly the better value for money. Essentially, whatever phone you're upgrading from, you'll still be getting the largest and best looking screen on any iPhone you've ever used. Plus, you'd still have the option to upgrade even further in the future by switching to one of the OLED displays, and this is something else that's important to consider. If you upgrade to an OLED display now, it would be very difficult to ever downgrade back to an LCD display in the future, which means you'll always be paying for the phones in that higher price tier range. Once you've experienced complete blacks and the fantastic contrast that OLED offers, it will be very disappointing to switch back to LCD. On the other hand, this is obviously an argument for the XS. If money isn't as much of an issue, then the XS and XS Max are obviously better phones overall. The improved water resistance, thinner body, 3D touch, and of course the thinner bezeled OLED displays are cool features to have. It's just that they aren't really worth the extra £250. If you are going to be watching a lot of movies, gaming, or do need the added benefits of the telescopic camera lens, then the XS models might be worthwhile for you. In terms of deciding between a XS and XS Max, Apple makes this choice a little easier in that you'd essentially spend £100 extra to get a larger version of the same phone. The advantage of the Max is that your content looks even more incredible. The difference that extra 0.7 of an inch makes, especially to video content, is quite surprising. Plus you'd have the added benefit of the better battery life. Still, practically speaking, the XS Max is not a one-handed device, and the XS is a much more comfortable device to use. Reachability is certainly going to be very important here. Of course, there are other practical factors to consider, such as the added size and weight. The XS Max is much more difficult to fit inside your pocket. Using a XS Max is like holding an iPhone 7 or 8 Plus in your hand, but of course now the entire front panel is all screen. Whereas the XS has a form factor more closely resembling a 7 or an 8, but with a display even larger than the Plus models. Incidentally, for those thinking of upgrading to an 8 or an 8 Plus, then definitely consider skipping the Plus and going for the XR. The extra £50 easily justifies the extra features, better battery, and the all-screen design. Adjusting to no longer having a home button won't take you too long, and Face ID is a worthwhile successor to Touch ID. For those already using one of the iPhone 8 models, I'd say it's probably a bit too soon to be upgrading, and I'd suggest skipping the new generation phones and waiting to see what next year has to offer. So that's it for this video, but please do let me know in the comments what you think the best iPhone of 2018 is, or simply the best phone altogether. Obviously this video is geared towards iPhone users, but maybe one of the other flagship models has caught your eye this year. Please give the video a like if you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one, and I'll see you all in the next one.